So, welcome to Soul Food Coffee House in scenic downtown Redmond, Washington. And I am Rick Levine, your designated astrologer for the next hour or so, in which we will look at what I like to call the cosmic weather. Astrology has many layers and many nuances. Every individual person has his or her or their own personal astrology that has to do with your birth or natal chart, where the sun and moon and all the planets were at the moment you were born from the perspective of your location on the planet. What we're looking at, though, today, this evening, is mundane astrology, and mundane sometimes is interpreted as, oh, it's boring or everyday, and that is, but the real word mundane, or the real origin, comes from the word mundus, and mundus means of the world. And mundane astrology is the astrology of the globe, of the planet, of the world, and so I look at it as the cosmic weather. And I like to give the example that if it's raining out, that's the weather. Now, that was the wrong use of the word. That's the weather. If you like the rain or not, has nothing to do with the fact that it's raining out. You know, if you have your bag all packed and your suntan lotion in your bag and your beach towel and you're ready on your day off to head to the beach and it's raining, that's a bummer. You're not going to have a good day, or your expectations will need to be changed. On the other hand, if you're a duck, you know, rainy days are the days when those damn humans don't come to the beach and it's all yours. So, point being is that everyone reacts differently to the same weather. So what we're talking about here is the weather. And the weather is, let's see, what's the technical word? Fucking crazy. It's nuts up there. I mean, and down here. And you don't need to be an astrologer. You don't even need to be very smart. You just need to be paying attention to what's going on to know that things are a bit crazy. I want to mention in passing that last month, because these are always done the last Wednesday of every month, and so I often talk about the last few days of the month because it's now, and now is Wednesday, September 26th, and so I will talk about now, even though technically this is about the month of October. But last month on August 25th, when I recorded the month of September, I zoned in to this week. From around the full moon through this week, around the 23rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, that period of time. And for those of you who are online or on Facebook, you can go to my Facebook page. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/astrologer. That'll get you to the page. And I have a link from a 3-minute excerpt from last month's talking about the relationship between these planets, between the Sun and Mercury having moved into Libra, quincunxing, that's 5/12 of a circle. A quincunx is an irritation. It's annoying. It's like the mosquito in the tent that only buzzes when you're ready to fall asleep. It's annoying. But this is part of a dynamic where this Sun-Mercury is also squaring to Saturn and making this kind of red, blue, green triangle that was more exact a few days ago. But it has to do with the annoyance between the Sun and Mercury, the communicator in Libra, wanting justice, quincunxing Uranus, that explosive, revolutionary, irrepressible energy that wants freedom. And it's called the awakener. It wants the truth and it wants to be awakened. And these two energies are not getting along right now. But the fact is that Uranus is harmonized or trine to Saturn. Uranus is breaking through to the new. Saturn is holding on to the old. And the square, which is now slightly dissipating, you can see here today on the 26th, the sun is at 3 moving into 4 degrees of Libra, just past the exact square to 2, really almost 3 degrees of Capricorn. Saturn holds back. Saturn says, go back to the drawing board and get it right. I need things correct before I'm letting you pass. And when Saturn is square Sun or Mercury, as it has been this past week, if you have that in a natal chart, it's often someone who's very resistant to change, and yet they can grow when they get the information that's not what they're expecting. Saturn square Mercury says, I have a hard time growing, but I have to open up and be less rigid, otherwise I get stuck in my old ways. We have an explosive situation going on in the United States right now. I'm saying this because many of the listeners online are in other countries. And the astrology of this time, of this year, is absolutely potent, and it never ceases to amaze me how the connections between the rhythms up there and down here correspond. I did another video last week, a cosmic quickie, which I do for my Patreon subscribers. And I should mention here at the front end, I always forget to do this at the front end, that if you go to www.patreon, that's like patron with an E in it, patreon.com/Rick Levine, you come up to a page that has my online video offerings. And everyone gets this, my monthly, free of charge. But for $3 a month extra, $3 a month, you also get a mid-month update that I do in my studio at home or wherever I am in the world. Last month's mid-month update, I dug deeply into the square last week between Mars, which is now at 4.5 degrees of Aquarius, to Uranus at 1 degree of Taurus. This square was exact last week when the second allegation came out, actually when that really kind of hit the fan. And I did some deep research on this, and I don't want to go too far into it right now, but I just want to mention it. If you subscribe, you can actually get the ones from the past, so you could get this. So here's the deal. This Mars square Uranus that has occurred now 3 times because Mars retrograded, and Mars's more recent opposition, last December, its opposition to Uranus, I began following this back and tracking the news against it. And I realized that the Me Too cover of Time magazine, #MeToo movement, basically happened when Mars was opposed Uranus the first week of December last year. Supreme Court Justice Kennedy resigned effective July 31st, and the Mars square Uranus was exact on August 1st. That was the retrograde one. The third one, pushing forward, was exact last week when all of this got really crazy. And of course, in the news, the similarity between this and the Anita Hill fiasco made me grab my computer and look backwards, and lo and behold, the day that the testimony, that the hearings opened for Clarence Thomas, had the same Mars square Uranus. You can't make this shit up like this. And interestingly enough, going back to Roe versus Wade, when the day that court, what do you call it when the court makes a decision?
Verdict.
Thank you. The day that verdict was announced, Jupiter in the sky was in that exact same square to Uranus. Now, it wasn't Mars, it was Jupiter. Jupiter's open, it's expansive, it's beneficent. And the video digs a lot deeper. There's a lot more dates that are tied to this. But we are in an extraordinary period of time that is resonating with other events in the past. And a lot of what's been going on began last fall when Jupiter, the expansive planet, the planet that makes, it's the magnifying lens, it's the planet that makes things bigger, better, and more. Jupiter is sometimes called the teacher because there's this aspect of bringing new perspectives to people. In Sanskrit, Jupiter is guru, which is just as it sounds, it's teacher. And last fall, when Jupiter moved into Scorpio, the sign of things that are hidden, the intense, passionate, emotional portion of the universe that's sometimes so intense you keep it buried. It's the subconscious, the unconscious, it's things that are out of sight, it's things that are not visible. And when Jupiter moved into Scorpio last fall, that's when these first allegations came up. Now, granted, during this Mars square to Uranus just last week, we also had Bill Cosby going off to prison. The reason why I'm spending any time painting this backward picture, and those of you who know me and my astrology and my work, you know that I think it's always a grave mistake for astrologers, whether they're doing client work or analysis of what's coming up, to just say, here is what's going to happen tomorrow, or next week, or next year, or whatever, because everything that happens in the future is tied to the present moment and tied to the past. Sometimes we forget that we think that karma means that the present is set based upon what we did in the past, but we somehow forget that the future is totally moldable depending upon what we do in the present. That karma isn't just something that happened to us or makes something happen now, it's something that's always in process. And so I think it's important to go look backward in order to look forward. And again, the reason why I wanted to spend time on this Jupiter in Scorpio and this whole energy that we've been dealing with over the past, 8 months now, or maybe even 10 months now, is because Venus, which entered Scorpio, I need my cheat sheet. Too many things to keep in place in my brain. Venus, which entered Scorpio on September 9th. So it's been all month virtually, and Venus is the planet of love, of sensuality, of attraction, of desire. When Venus entered Scorpio, feelings become more intense. And anyone who I like to say, who owns a Venus in Scorpio, although we don't own the planets, knows the intensity and the power and the passion of Venus in Scorpio. So Venus moved into Scorpio back in the beginning of September. And Venus has been moving along, but it's slowed down. Venus travels, because it's closer to the sun than the Earth. When you look at the sun, make believe that the microphone is the sun. Venus going around the sun, from where you are on Earth, Venus can never get really that far away from the sun. It's always within the same sign, a sign, or two signs ahead or before. So Venus reached its maximum elongation, its maximum distance from the sun now, and is turning retrograde, because from Earth's point of view, that's what a retrograde is. A retrograde is these planets going around, but it looks like they're going like this. It's an optical illusion. The planets don't really go backwards. I've talked about retrogrades a number of times in the past. I don't want to dig too deeply into the phenomena of the retrograde. So Venus retrogrades in a very interesting fashion. You know, we know about Mercury retrograde. It retrogrades 3 times a year for about 3 weeks at a time. And because Mercury is so close to the sun, it's almost like a pendulum going back and forth. But Venus retrogrades about every other year, a little bit less than that. And it does it for 40 days. And I think that there is some connection to the biblical 40 days and 40 nights. This is Venus's journey, if you will, into the underworld. This is another whole topic, a mythological topic that we could dig into some other time. But from our point of view, the thing that we need to note right now is that Venus turns retrograde on October 5th. And it remains retrograde until until November 15th. Sorry. So it's about 6 weeks or so. When a planet is retrograde, its energy is amped up. It's louder, which can make it more difficult to deal with, because when everything is in its place, we know how to move and operate. But if all of a sudden one radio station is coming in over all the others, that can make us a bit nuts, because we need to figure out how we can work with that. And unfortunately, our automatic response typically is to just shut it down. And this is why retrogrades can be problematic, because we tend to put them into denial or suppress them consciously or repress them unconsciously. But in one way or another, retrograde planets often make themselves known through projection, because what we suppress or what we repress comes to us out there from the environment. And projection, I could talk for 2 or 3 hours on the phenomenon of projection, which is, although he certainly is politically incorrect these days on many things, we would really have no depth psychology at all without Sigmund Freud, who basically figured out this whole concept of projection, that which we suppress, that which we repress or suppress, appears out there as projection. In fact, just look at the White House and you see the projector in chief, basically saying that I need to thank my dear friend Gail, an editor, for that line. It's beautiful. Because all the things that he's basically accusing everybody else of is what he does. Unfortunately here tonight, because of this Venus thing, we're going to step into a little bit of political territory. This always polarizes a small portion of my viewer audience, and all I can say to them right now is that if you want to argue about political references or points of view, do it elsewhere, not on my YouTube page. Thank you. It's my page. Okay. But what's significant here is that we're going into a month and a half, which will carry us through Election Day, when Venus is retrograde and that energy is heated up. When Mars is retrograde, people get more angry. It was retrograde about a month and a half ago, and it was obvious in both the political jargon, conversations, and in individual lives. People were on edge. They were frustrated, and they were ready to start fights in all the wrong places. Well, with Venus, it's a little different. Okay, so let's take a look at this Venus thing. Because right now, Venus is at 9 degrees of Scorpio. It will get up to almost 11 degrees to 10 degrees 50 minutes on October 5th. It backs up into Libra by Halloween, October 31st. By November 15th, it's backed all the way up to 25 degrees of Libra. It starts moving forward again. By December 2nd, it's back into Scorpio, the intensity and the depth again. And then by December 17th, it hits 10 degrees 50 minutes of Scorpio, and it's now moving into new territory. What that means is that until December 17th, we're going to be in this kind of never land in the shadow realms, if you will, where Venus will have moved forward, backward over the exact same territory, and then forward through that same territory again. When Venus turns direct on November 15th, it may feel like things are kind of moving forward. This is a week or so after Election Day, and I think that's very significant. But when Venus turns direct, it may feel like things are moving forward, but it's not until Venus gets out of her shadow. And the shadow is the area in the sky where a planet goes through, retrogrades, and then goes through a third time. Now, what this means is that on September 2nd, going back to the beginning of September, Venus on September 2nd was at 25 degrees of Libra, the point at which it will go direct after going retrograde. It'll go direct at that point on November 15th. So here's the deal. From September 2nd, past a month ago, all the way through December 17th, Venus is in this altered state where normally she visits a spot once every year and a half or so, but now she's visiting this area once, twice, 3 times, and instead of the energy lasting for a day or 2 or 3, it's lasting September, October, November, and half of December. It's lasting 3.5 months. What's the difference? It's still Venus. It's like having someone come over once a month to play a game of chess, have a glass of wine, and go home. And this person does this, every month for years, and then one time he or she comes over, plays a game of chess, has a glass of wine, and goes home, but doesn't go home for 8 months. It's the exact same dynamic, but we wear it very differently. Are you with me here? So I'm trying to get the sense that Venus right now is incredibly important. The other piece of this, and this won't happen until, I thought I made a note of this, but it doesn't happen until it doesn't happen until sometime in December. I think, let's see, a little bit before then. It happens in November. And that is that right now Venus looks like it's heading towards Jupiter. Venus and Jupiter in the astrological universe, Venus and Jupiter are the cosmic good guys. The Greeks called them the benefics. Jupiter, who is a guy, was the greater benefic. Venus, obviously a woman, was the lesser benefic. I'm not sure it was intended sexist because Jupiter is huge compared to all the planets. By the same token, Mars and Saturn were considered to be the bad guys, the malefics, and Saturn the greater malefic and Mars the lesser malefic. Now, planets aren't really good or bad. It's really how easy or difficult it is to work with the energy. The fact of the matter is that Jupiter and Venus are typically easy to work with. Why? Because Jupiter says yes. Jupiter expands. Jupiter's optimistic. It's buoyant. It's inspirational. It's educational. It's travel. It's anything that moves the individual outward. Venus is nice, is sweet, is yummy, is sensual, and I don't necessarily mean sexual, I mean of the senses. Venus has to do with things that we can taste, touch, feel. Venus is about beauty. Venus is the planet of love. So when Venus and Jupiter get together in the sky, this is astrologically a good deal. However, Venus, which moved into Scorpio back at the beginning of September, is heading towards Jupiter. Good deal, good deal, good deal. But she doesn't get there. She can't consummate the deal. She backs up into Libra, works out some stuff about fairness and equanimity and balance, and then she moves back into Scorpio, and then she will connect up with Jupiter. But remember, Jupiter isn't just pretty. Because Jupiter, as a magnifying glass, has been focusing on some pretty bad shit. So this is where we are in the scheme of October and moving toward Election Day, which even though it's technically in November and my contract may be canceled because I'm only allowed to talk about October. Just kidding. But this scenario that I'm describing is very important as we lead up to Election Day. So, Whew. It's crazy up there. Did I say that already? All right.
Crazy down here.
Well, for those of you on the internet, someone said it's crazy down here, and my response is that the emerald tablet, which allegedly was from Hermes Trismegistus, Hermes the thrice great, the giver of truth in Egypt, it's from that tablet that the axiom, as above, so below. And yet we often get mixed up with that because we think that what's up there makes happen what's down here, but it's actually as above, so below. The within of things is as the without of things. And what it really says is that we're riding on some midpoint between the microcosmic very tiny, the macrocosmic very large, and it's the same. The very large and the very same are, the very large and the very small are the same. And so, yes, when it's crazy up there, it's crazy down here, and vice versa. So let's come back now to our chart of the beginning of the month. Here we are showing September 26th, the end of the previous month, and we're going to move this one day at a time. And there's September 27th, 28th. I mean, we're still coming off of a pretty intense full moon, a full moon that was conjunct Chiron and square Saturn. This is heavy energy. Chiron is retrograde now. It's coming closer to the Earth. Chiron had peaked into Aries and has now moved back into Pisces for a remedial course in compassion. You know, we need to learn about the emotionality of this rather than just blasting ahead. On October 2nd, we come to our first significant aspect of the month, and that is Mercury squares Pluto on October 2nd. And this is an interesting thing because on that day, the moon is in Cancer opposing Jupiter. The moon in Cancer opposing Pluto in Capricorn, both being squared by Mercury. And I would expect for those of you who are news junkies, not that every day doesn't issue us surprises these days, but October 2nd will be a major disclosure or a major shift, because when Mercury squares Pluto, Mercury is facts, it's intellectual. In Libra, it's looking for equanimity, balance, and fairness. It's looking to get things right. It squares Pluto, and Pluto is the power that is transformative, but it can also be nasty. And so Mercury squared to Pluto can be a real power struggle. So it might be an acute flare-up of what has already been going on. And again, I'm talking about some of this in reference to the political scenario just because it's so crazy. But it's also about our individual lives, our personalities, our relationships. When Mercury squares Pluto, things can, you may find yourself talking about things that you weren't sure you really wanted to talk about. It may not be easy, but bringing things into the light is always better than keeping them in the dark. All right, I want to take the aspects to the moon off just for a moment here. Aspected points, and get rid of the aspects to the moon. It's just because the moon moves so fast, I don't want to get distracted. I mean, it has very important impact hour to hour and day to day, but week to week and month to month, it's the slower moving planets. The astrological axiom is the slower moving the planet, the heavier its weight. And that's roughly always true. So, as we move forward, this is October 2nd, watch Venus. Venus is at 10, almost 11 degrees of Scorpio, 10 degrees, 42 minutes on the 2nd. On the 3rd, it's barely moved 5 minutes of orb. That's 1/12 of a degree. By the following day, it's only moved 2 more minutes of orb. It's barely moving now because, like, when a planet goes retrograde, it's like a pendulum, and a pendulum has to stop to change directions. And in fact, a pendulum is moving its fastest halfway through, and it slows down as it reaches one end of its cycle, stops, reverses directions, moves very slowly at first, and then begins to speed up. Well, we're at a point right now where Venus in the sky is just about stopped. I mean, already now, today, at the end of September, Venus ain't moving much. She ain't going away, guys. You know, and I'm speaking to those, 11 old white guys, sitting on that committee. Venus ain't going away. She's right now in the sky, holding her position in Scorpio and saying, you're going to acknowledge my presence. That's part of what's going on. It's certainly part of a larger scenario. The other piece of this that's very significant is that Venus, I'm going to back this up a little bit day by day by day. I'm going to back this up all the way to September, there we go, to September 10th, 9th, 10th, when Venus moved into Scorpio the same day that Mars moved into Aquarius, and Venus and Mars were 90 degrees to one another. September 10th, they were 90 degrees to one another, and Venus was opposite Uranus. I don't have my Google brain right now in front of me, but I would imagine that if you Googled the September 8th, 9th, 10th, the 10th was a Monday, 11th, that there would be stuff in the news that was kind of precedent to what's going on now, because Venus was opposite Uranus and Mars was moving closer and closer to its square, and I talked about the square and its repetitive cycles a little bit earlier. So Venus was opposite Uranus then, and then as we move this forward a day at a time, Venus reaches all the way up to its, and as it goes through that point, it also squares Mars. All right, Venus then reaches its point now where it's barely moving. There it is on the 2nd at 10 degrees 42 minutes, on the 3rd 10 degrees 47 minutes, the next day 10 degrees 49 minutes, the next day 10 degrees 50 minutes. It's barely moved 1/60th of a degree in 24 hours. And on the 5th, it actually retrogrades and it begins moving backwards from Earth's point of view. It's back to 1048 on the 6th, 1043, it moved 5 degrees, and then it begins moving backwards. All right, but through this whole period of time where Venus is slowed down and begins to move backwards, Mars is still moving forward. And what that means is that the Venus-Mars square that we had back at the beginning of September, we're getting a redux, we're getting a replay. It's happening again around October 9th. The actual Venus square Mars is actually on October 10th. Venus square Mars on October 10th. Venus square Mars can be a lot of fun if you're getting along with your mate, because it can be very playful. It's sparring, it's chemistry, it's sparks flying, it's makeup sex. It's the energy of what happens when there's yin and yang, when there's Venus and Mars. Venus is what you like, Mars is how you go get it. Often Venus is the feminine and Mars is the masculine, but there's a whole gender complication thing that we're not going to delve into now, which we could some night, but not now. The point is that Venus squaring Mars is also battle. Mars, the god of war, fighting Venus, the goddess of love. I don't think I need to be any more exacting. On that same day, Mercury is opposite Uranus. Now remember, these squares and oppositions and hard angles to Uranus seem to keep coming back again and again and again during these Supreme Court hearings and Roe versus Wade and Anita Hill and so on. And so on the 10th, we have Mercury opposing Uranus on the same day that Venus is squaring Mars. Again, more difficult energy, I am sure. Right behind it, the Sun which we'll already be feeling that day. The sun on the 11th squares Pluto. The sun at 18 degrees of Libra is exactly square 90 degrees to Pluto, while Venus is squaring Mars. This is sparks flying. This is energy that is being released dynamically. Squares are astrologically the hardest of all the aspects. I say hard, not hard soft. Hard meaning hard easy. Why are they hard? Because these are two energies going in different directions. As soon as the angle is less than 90, they're kind of going in the same direction, even though they're doing it differently. As greater than 90, they're moving more towards an opposition. But at 90 degrees, the 90-degree angle is what physicists call the maximum destruction of two waves. If you have two waves that are out of sequence by 90 degrees, they have maximum interference. And so that's what we have going on the 9th, 10th, 11th, both with Venus and Mars, the cosmic lovers, and with Mercury and Pluto. Now, Mercury and Pluto have their own mythological dance that's very powerful. And again, I don't have time to dig deeply into this. Come to Bali, we'll have 10 days. Nope, too late. Next time. When the young Venus, Persephone, if you will, when Persephone, the daughter of Ceres, the goddess of the grain, cereal, Ceres, when Persephone was abducted into the underworld by Pluto and raped, Mom was not happy, Ceres. And she went to Jupiter, the king of the gods, and said, "You got to go get my daughter back." Pluto got her. And Jupiter said, "Can't do. None of us can cross over into the hell realms. We lose our identity. But I can send Mercury." You see, because Mercury, the psychopomp, Mercury is just the message. There's no substance. And so Mercury, who goes back and forth into the underworld and out, Mercury was sent as the first shuttle diplomat to rescue Persephone. So here we have Mercury squaring Pluto on the same day that Venus is squaring Mars. And the mythology here is really interesting, and I don't know how this will play out, but by the 15th, when I do my next month's mid-month update, I'm sure I'll have a good story to wrap around this, because this is some pretty intense dancing that we got here. By the way, not only is Mercury opposing Uranus on the 10th, but by the 11th, Mercury also forms a harmonious sextile with Saturn. Mercury forms a harmonious sextile with Saturn, which basically says what Mercury is saying is real. Because Saturn is the planet of reality, of substance. You can't just make Saturn go away. Saturn's not the mosquito in the tent. Saturn is the lead weight, that is chained to your heart or your foot. So this is what's cooking through the beginning of the month, and we breezed right over. I'm going to back up a couple of days, because right in this we have on the 8th at 8:46 p.m. This is close enough for what we need to look at. We have the new moon in Libra. And that new moon in Libra, at a new moon, this is feeding into all the energy that I just talked about. But the new moon in Libra is quincunx to the Neptune. And what's interesting is quincunx are annoying. And so here we got the story being told, but that damn Neptune won't go away. So what is the truth? We don't know. What is the truth? We don't know. And this new moon, though, still plants the seed for the following month, and I think that the fact that the Venus retrograde squaring Mars is so close, this new moon square Pluto is so close, this is definitely bringing the power struggle out into the open. And I think this sets the tone that leads up to Election Day. And by the way, the next new moon is the day after, 1 or 2 days after Election Day. And so we have Election Day at the very, 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 very end of the cycle of this Libra New Moon. The Scorpio New Moon occurs, I think, is Election Day the 6th this year? Yeah. And I think the new moon is on the 7th or 8th, so it's right in there. All right. Also, we have right here, we have Mercury moving. I'm looking for, oh, there it is. We have Mercury moving from, what did I just do? Oh, to doom, October. Oh, we jumped back to here. Let's go back to where we were. Sorry about that. There we go. On October 8th, we have Mercury, who's really moving fast right now. Mercury, who is a bit invisible because it's on the far side of the sun. So Mercury is on October 8th moving from Libra into Scorpio. And when Mercury moves into Scorpio, and this is setting another piece of this whole stress and tension, Mercury moves into Scorpio, it's opposite Uranus in Taurus. Now understand that Uranus was in Aries for 7 years. It moved into Taurus back in May, and next month in November, Uranus backs into Aries again, and then moves forward. And so we're in this totally dynamic, changing period of time, and Mercury here on the 9th being opposite Uranus. Again, we have explosive, sudden words that are spoken. People may say things that they don't quite mean, or that may come out wrong, or once again, someone's on mic who shouldn't be on mic. I don't know how it'll play out, but when Mercury and Uranus are lined up like that, you can expect the intellect, the communication, the words to be Uranian, irrepressible, coming out into the open. So that's on the 9th. All right, moving ahead, we then have the Sun square Pluto and the Venus square Mars on the 10th and 11th. And then by October 15th, we have Mercury moving through Scorpio, day by day catching up to Venus, which is retrograding back into it. So we see day by day here, Mercury, which is now moving almost 2 degrees a day, and Venus, which is moving backwards. The two of them actually meet up, boom. Oh, I went too far. Right there. There's Mercury catching up with Venus, which is retrograding back into it. The actual conjunction is midday on October 15th, and that is huge. It's very, very significant because Mercury communication, Venus love, Venus feminine. The feminine energy gets voice. It is heard. And again, we have, I think this may be tied to some of the same issues going on now. I have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow, which is the alleged hearings for the Supreme Court nomination process for Brett Kavanaugh. I have no idea. I know that as of this evening, a 4th allegation has now come out. I mean, it's going to get crazier. And they may push it through, they meaning the old white Republican guys may be in total denial, and they may push it through anyhow. Regardless, what happens now is setting a tone and is setting a stage that's not going to go away. Whether this guy makes it onto the Supreme Court or not is almost not the issue. The issue is the deeper process which is going on and what's coming out into the open. It's not going to go away. And on October 15th, when Mercury and Venus line up, we have another round of that. Okay, so this Mercury, which is moving rather quickly now, Mercury there at 9 degrees of Scorpio, over the next few days will reach 14 degrees of Scorpio, and watch this thin line marking this trine, this harmonious flowing of energy from the water, emotional water sign Scorpio to the emotional water sign Pisces. And so as I move this a day at a time, nope, there was 2 days, 3 days, oh, it's moving way too fast. Stop that, slow down. Okay, so here we have on October 19th, we have Mercury forming a trine with Neptune and a square with Mars. Mercury forming a trine with Neptune. That's the dream, the imagination, the potential, the magic, if you will, that's given to Mercury. It's a silver-tongued Mercury in a way. But Mercury is also now square Mars, where Venus was, so we got that dynamic again. We got a problem. Mercury is speaking its piece, but it's running into a blockage. And so this energy seems to be prevalent throughout the month. By the time we get to the 23rd, I'm going to jump ahead here. That's the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, 23rd. On the 23rd, we have the sun changing signs from Libra into Scorpio. And when it does, on that moment it moves into Scorpio, it opposes Uranus. Remember, Uranus is the revolutionary, it's the irrepressible energy, it's the planet that explodes when it's repressed or suppressed. It's the planet that was involved in in Roe versus Wade, Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas, Anita Hill, and currently in this whole fiasco that's going on now. And when the sun opposes it on the 23rd, we can expect more energy to come out. And now here's the thing to keep in mind, because Venus is retrograding. And so Venus, as the sun moves through that 1 degree a day, brings it into emphasis around the 22nd, 23rd when it moves into Scorpio. By the same token, Venus still retrograding is going to come right back through that same point again. And that occurs right there when Venus on October 29th is actually opposed Uranus. It's actually exact because Venus is still moving pretty slow. It's really not exact until the 30th, even the 31st. Venus changes signs back into Libra on the 31st. So all of this is keeping Uranus in the spotlight throughout the whole month. And incidentally, as we did this, we jumped past, and I'm going to come back to it now, we jumped past the full moon on October 24th, when the sun is opposing Uranus. Venus is still coming into the equation. That same day on the 24th, we can actually zone into this a little bit closer. Not a minute at a time. Let's make this an hour at a time. There we go. So here we go. And the actual, that's close enough. The actual full moon occurs on the 24th at 9:45 a.m., and that's Pacific time. And that full moon on the 24th is extremely intense because the last full moon was conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer. This full moon is conjunct wild, crazy, irrepressible, sudden, unexpected, action-oriented Uranus. It's again the truth. And so the full moon on the 24th is conjunct Uranus, with the sun obviously opposed Uranus. Venus still in the mix, but Venus now moving into a sextile with Saturn. I mean, it's still all there. It's not exact, but the moon and Uranus are still harmonized, trining with Saturn. Saturn's moving faster than Uranus, and so this aspect trine between holding the structures in place, Saturn, authority, Saturn, and Uranus, blow up the authority. These two planets, which normally don't get along, over these past months, excuse me, have actually been working in this trine aspect, and so there is communication, and we see the last wave of this, I think, happening around this full moon on the 24th. By the 29th, Mercury, remember I talked earlier about Venus eventually catching up with Jupiter, Jupiter still being the culprit, still being the guy here who's holding the magnifying lens on all of the stuff that's coming up from the hidden realms, all this stuff that's coming up from the unconscious, that's been repressed. And as we go, not an hour at a time, as we go a day at a time, Mercury catches up to Uranus. There it is right there. Mercury catches up with Jupiter on the 29th, the same day that the Sun is actually just coming into, and then followed, the Sun makes a sextile with Saturn. So we have the Sun harmonizing with Saturn exactly by degree, and then we have Mercury catching up with Jupiter. So what does this mean? The Venus-Saturn is basically making it real. Allowing for cooperation between the feminine, excuse me. Let's try this. Allowing for cooperation between the feminine energy, Venus, and Saturn, the power structure, Saturn, the authority. And right into that, we have Mercury lining up with Jupiter. What happens when Mercury lines up with Jupiter? What's Mercury? Key word, any word.
Communication.
What's Jupiter?
Expansion.
It's another round of more coming out than we want to know. You know, this is like someone perhaps in a moment of feeling safe or something, saying things that they just shouldn't say. Trump.
Stormy Daniels and Trump's penis. TMI.
It's all too much information. But the fact is that when Mercury lines up with Jupiter, again, there's words that are being spoken that are more than what's normally said. So the month ends with this kind of explosive energy. Oh, and also, although I don't have it marked, Mercury, because I can add this here real quickly, aspected points, and I'm going to, aspected points, and I'm going to add Chiron into this mix. And as I do, you can see this big old fat trine occurring between Jupiter moving toward its trine with Chiron, which is not exact until next month, but Mercury makes that trine. And again, we have the potential here for those things that were too much, that TMI, that too much information that comes out into the open because it's trining Chiron, and Chiron has backed into compassionate Pisces. We have an opportunity to heal. I would say that we even have an opportunity to forgive, but I'm not going that far. We have an opportunity to heal. And I think it's really important that the month ends on that note. And yet, as I said earlier, at the same time, we have on the last day of the month, as Venus backs up into Libra, just before she hits Libra, she hits on the 31st, that exact opposition to Uranus. And again, we have another round of crazy explosive energy. Also, on the 31st, Venus, which backs into Libra, really gives us a chance once again to look at things through a cooler and calmer perspective. There's nothing cool and calm about Scorpio. And, for much of this month, we have Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, and the Sun all in Scorpio. Scorpio is extreme. It's love, hate. There's very little middle ground. Scorpio has a hard time finding middle ground because it responds with intense power, passion, and perspective. Now, by the end of the month, Mercury has moved off into Sagittarius. I think I missed that date, but it was on the 30th, just a day prior to the chart we're looking at here. Mercury moves into Sagittarius, and then Venus moves into Libra, and it's almost like the first days of November, all of a sudden there's a round of, oh. Now, this is odd, knowing that we're only a week away from Election Day, isn't it? But I don't know how this is going to play out, but as Mercury moves into Sagittarius, there's almost like we can think about, we can see that bigger picture, because Sagittarius is the distance. Sagittarius is far away. Sagittarius is the ideal. I keep saying Saturn. Let's try this again. Mercury in Sagittarius is like it's talking about going on the journey of your lifetime. But it doesn't matter whether or not you take it, because it's about the projection into the future, into some place where you've never been. So we have Mercury doing that, while we have Venus backing up into Libra saying, let's get this right. And I think that this is, along with the potential of Jupiter trining Chiron, which I think brings out the highest potential of healing possibilities, I think that we have a very strong potential of making a crazy, powerful statement at the polls the first week of November. I mean, again, I don't think you need to be an astrologer to see the handwriting on that wall right now. But, you know, in this crazy political environment in the United States, only a stupid person would make a forecast about anything, because nothing is quite happening the way that we expected. But I do think that this all leads to a very interesting first week of November. And I want to end with just jumping ahead to the actual election day, which is Tuesday, November 6th. And on that day, we have Jupiter just past the trine to Chiron. We have Venus and Mars now, not quite exact, but within 3 degrees, 24, 25, 26, 27. Venus and Mars, which had been square, are now trine. They're getting along. And we also have that Jupiter trining Chiron, they're working fine. And we also have the Sun trining Neptune, which is exact on the 5th. This is about idealism. When the Sun trines Neptune, remember, Neptune is dreams, it's imagination, it's also delusion and confusion. But when the light of the Sun is harmonizing with Neptune, there's a chance to dream the best case scenario. So that's what this month looks like, and all I can say is don't get lazy because everything looks like it's getting better. Get out and vote. I don't care who you vote for, but in the United States, you gotta vote. You gotta vote. It's everything out there. I don't care what kind of conspiracy theories you harbor. I don't care what political spectrum you're on. Go out and vote, because if we don't make ourselves heard now, we never will. That's it. Thank you very much. Have a great month.